Hi everyone, welcome back to Cody'sLab. So today I'm going to be making a terrarium out of this massive 6.5 gallon glass bottle, but with one major twist. Rather than just putting in any old plants and animals in here, I am going to be attempting to, as close as possible, recreate a geologic time period. So it'll be as if I traveled back in time with my bottle, scooped up some plants, animals, dirt, and atmosphere from that time period, capping it off and then bringing it into the future. So it's not going to be perfect. I mean, obviously I don't have access to the genetic engineering that they could do for Jurassic Park, but my version of Jurassic Park would just have chickens instead of dinosaurs. So, you know. So, the geologic time period which I will be tackling first will be my favorite one, the Carboniferous. The geologic period from 360 to 300 million years ago. It was during this period that most of the world's coal formed. Coal is mostly carbon, hence the name Carboniferous. So, why was so much coal and carbon being formed in this time period? Well, it all comes down to the appearance of vascular plants. Very similar to this horsetail reed here. Vascular plants could of course pump water out of the ground and up to great heights. Before this time period, you really only had algae and lichens, things that grew on a very thin surface in wet areas, like covering rocks that were getting pounded by waves. Vascular plants could take that 2 dimensions and expand into the 3 dimensions. That vastly increased the amount of surface area that it could interact with the sun and the biomass that it could store. And as it happens, vascular plants had just invented cellulose. Cellulose is a polysaccharide, which means it's a sugar made of smaller sugars all strung together. And it forms a very strong material, which of course is what keeps the vascular plants standing up. But it was so new that nothing was around that could eat it. No bacteria, no herbivores, nothing. When one of these plants died, it pretty much just sat around, getting buried by more plants dying. Sure, fungus and bacteria could get in and eat out all of the protein and stuff, but the cellulose was left completely untouched. And so as long as a big fire didn't start and burn the cellulose, it would just stack up in thick layers, which eventually would get covered by more sediment and compressed into coal. And actually something that's kind of interesting is the cellulose at the time would have been about as inert as plastic is today. And the fun thing is that a lot of plastic is made from coal. And since most of the world's coal was formed during the Carboniferous, it's the same carbon, and it's doing the same thing. So now, since we have all of this reduced carbon being piled up on land, it creates a huge sink which disrupts the carbon cycle on the Earth, vastly changing the Earth's atmosphere. So now, instead of carbon dioxide being released, absorbed into the oceans, and then reacting to form carbonate rock, the carbon dioxide was being consumed by plants, turned into carbon, releasing the oxygen, and this stuff sticks around, making the oxygen in the atmosphere far more concentrated. In fact, towards the end of the Carboniferous, oxygen levels were 35% compared to the 21% we have today. But it's actually more significant than that. You see, nitrogen and argon, such as what I have here, really didn't change much over geologic history. We might have lost a little bit of nitrogen through spallation, through cosmic rays, or we might have formed a little bit more argon as the radioactive potassium decays. But for the most part, levels remain constant. So what we have is you're adding a bunch of oxygen to the atmosphere without changing the other gases, which means the air pressure was higher. Today we have a sea level atmospheric pressure of about 760 torr. Back then the air pressure was about 920. And the difference is made up entirely to oxygen, which means that the atmospheric concentration of oxygen was about twice what it is now. The terrestrial animals that existed during this period were things like early amphibians and arthropods, invertebrate things like insects. And because of the high oxygen levels, those were able to grow very large. Today they are limited by the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere. They can only grow so big before the amount of body mass exceeds their capability of absorbing oxygen. Increase the oxygen in the air, they can grow much larger. The Meganeura, very similar to dragonflies, were able to grow to wingspans of 1 meter across. And you would have had things like millipedes running around in the underbrush of the giant forests the size of anacondas. Of course, I'm not going to be able to have an anaconda-sized millipede, but I can put some normal millipedes in here and see how big they get. I don't expect them to grow a whole lot larger. You need evolution to really boost that, but let's see what happens. As you can see over here, I've got loads of plants, and these are all things that are descended from plants that would have been around during the Carboniferous. So of course we have mosses, we have liverworts. You can see I've got most of these in bags because they like high humidity. Liverwort, reeds, and ferns. And for the animals, I've collected some bugs that were in my yard. See, we've got some millipedes, centipedes. I have a slug. I thought that slugs would be around, but turns out land slugs didn't evolve until the Cretaceous, so I might leave these guys out. I also have some smaller bugs. These are springtails. These springtails are really cute. I do hope they grow larger. But even at the size they are now, they are great for getting rid of excess mold. So the first thing I need to do is put in some gravel down in the bottom of this chamber to act as a storage for water. So we're going to make an aquifer. This is some quartzite pebbles, originally intended for fish tanks. So it's just some fish tank gravel here. Pour it in, hopefully it doesn't damage the glass. Before I'm finished with the gravel, I want to mix in a different type of gravel. So this is some carbonate pebbles. This is Mississippian limestone. So this actually formed during the earlier half of the Carboniferous in shallow seas. So it was mostly formed from animal shells. This one is actually a piece of oolitic limestone, which is interesting. And the reason I'm adding this is to give a source of calcium and also act as a pH buffer. If it becomes too acidic in the bottle, these will begin to dissolve, keeping the pH more towards the neutral end. While I'm at it, I'm also going to add in some fertilizer. So this is mostly a calcium phosphate here, act as a source of phosphorus, along with some potassium chloride, potassium nitrate, a little bit of iron chelate, some magnesium sulfate, boron, manganese, molybdenum, copper. I actually weighed out far too much. I'm just going to add in maybe a third of this. But I want to make sure there's plenty of nutrients available. So now I'm going to add in a little bit of water. This is some distilled water. Just enough that I can see maybe a ½ inch on the bottom of the chamber. Just enough to supply water to the aquifer. So now I'm going to add a mixture of peat moss and charcoal. This is actually activated charcoal. The peat moss will simulate the high carbon environment that would have made up the forest floors of the Carboniferous. And the charcoal will represent the high amounts of charcoal that would have been around due to the periodic forest fires. There is, however, one major difference between this peat moss and the mossy, carbon-rich soil of the Carboniferous, and that is the bacteria. The bacteria that I have here is capable of digesting cellulose, and so this peat moss will eventually decompose, releasing its carbon for the plants to use. Which is good because it means this terrarium will be sustainable. So now I need to add a layer of charcoal. Charcoal is also pretty good to use in terrariums because it absorbs odors and toxins quite well. I have a little tool here that I can use to reach in and move things around. If I wanted to pick up some of this peat moss, I can. Knock it around. So there you go. A little layer of gravel with water and some peat moss. So now I guess it's time for the plants. Let's start with some of these ferns. So I got a little rock tassel fern here. Let's open this up. See what we can do about getting it inside this bottle. Cute little plant, yeah? Let's get it out of its pot. Okay. They don't fit. I'm going to have to basically shake all the dirt off of its roots probably. So I've dramatically decreased the bulk. Let's see if we can get it in there now. It just barely fits. That's all I need. Let's grab hold of it with my little grabber. So I can, that's not going to work. Lower it in. Use my grabber. Dig a little hole for it. Now if I can pick it up and put it in the hole without hurting it, that'd be great. Okay, I got the little fern in place. It was not easy, and it's not exactly standing straight up. I might be able to tweak it over a little bit. Doesn't matter too much. It'll find its vertical eventually. And now I get to do it about 10 more times with the other plants. I am, however, going to introduce the animals now before I get too many plants. I'm going to try to keep the slugs out. I won't permanently seal this bottle, so if you guys think I should put the slugs in, let me know down in the comments, and I might add them at a later date. There's my centipede, which is probably the largest animal that will be going in here today. I'm going to keep this clover out because that is not of the period. Here goes the springtails. I'm not going to put all of them in. I want to save some to add to my trees that I'm trying to root to keep the mold from growing. Okay, so I just separated out a cluster of these reeds. Now, these are of course too tall for the bottle, so I might have to cut them short. You can see there's a couple of new ones growing up there. So it really shouldn't be too much trouble to just break these off so they'll actually fit. Now of course it's going to grow up and all around, but that's alright. I'm also going to put in a smaller dwarf variety of these reeds. These won't get as big and it'll probably fit the bottle better. Okay, all the plants and animals are in there. I'm just going to spritz it with a little bit of water to wash the dirt down off the side of the bottle. And also water in the plants. Peat moss is actually quite dry. So now of course I've got to change the atmosphere. So I need to put a plug in this that won't come out, and I can pressurize with a little bit of oxygen. So this is what I've come up with to seal in the oxygen. As you can see, I've got a rubber stopper which I've shoved a shorter valve through, and to hold it in place I've wired it on with the help of this hose clamp here. I could potentially push the cork down a little farther and then put on some epoxy to seal it for good, but I think I would like to be able to open it, even if it's a pain. Anyway, to get the atmosphere in the bottle the same as it would have been during the Carboniferous, we need to add some oxygen. So to do that, I'm going to just put this rubber hose over top of the Schroeder valve, kind of screw it on here. I need to be able to activate the valve, so I'm going to drop in a nail. Now, to account for the fact that I'm not at sea level, I need to pressurize the bottle a little bit with just normal air. For that, I'm just going to use my breath. Okay, that should be enough air. So now I'm going to hook up the torch, I'm going to turn on just the oxygen. Now I'm going to set the torch regulator for 5 pounds per square inch. And now I just activate the shorter valve, and the oxygen's flowing in. And that's probably it. Turn off the O2. And now I'll replace the little valve cap. Now we have the Carboniferous Terrarium fully made. So unfortunately, I've made a pretty big mistake. The peat moss, which I used as the medium in here, is highly acidic. Most of these plants in here are gonna die if I don't do something. So, fortunately, I've got to release the pressure and add some lime or something to neutralize the acids. Well, I have some chalk. Maybe if I ground this up and mixed it with water and then ran it down into the moss. So here's the ground chalk mixed with water. I'm going to just pour it in on top of my plants here. Hopefully this neutralizes the acids. Ah, there's a springtail. See it? Crawling in the glass. So I know they've at least survived. It's been about 2 days since my last cut. In that time I've put in the chalk. You can see there's some pieces in there. I also added a little bit of aqueous ammonia, just maybe like a teaspoon's worth, just to knock down the acidity of that peat moss. I did add those limestone pebbles, but they would have just taken far too long. By that time most everything would have been dead, but judging by that springtail, it's still crawling around. And it's been 2 days. I think we're good. You can see I've got them sitting underneath of a light. This is just temporary right now, just so I can sit here and easily watch it. And I have repressurized it with oxygen. I purged it with air first, just to make sure I didn't get crazy high oxygen levels in there. So you might be asking how I plan to maintain the oxygen level if I don't open the jar. And well, it should stay more or less the same. You see, the animals will consume the plant matter in here, releasing carbon dioxide, and then as long as I've got plenty of light, the plants should convert the carbon dioxide back into plants, releasing oxygen. So the total oxygen level should remain about the same. The chalk and other calcium carbonates that I've got in there will absorb some CO2, taking oxygen out of the system, but that'll happen rather slowly, and certainly a lot slower and less than if I would have used lime. So that's why I ended up using chalk. Just to be sure, I can periodically check the atmosphere of the bottle. I did after I'll leave a port here. And if the oxygen levels get out of whack, I can correct it. One thing that would make me open the jar is if there was, say, a flowering plant or some other species that didn't belong that managed to find its way into here. I would have to, get in there with my little gripper and pull it out. Or maybe use my laser to zap it, burn it to death. But considering the high oxygen environment, that might be a bad idea. I'll have to do some tests to see exactly what happens if I do try to burn something in a high oxygen environment like this. It's not pure oxygen, but it is twice the oxygen, so it should burn faster, but also everything in here is wet, so I don't really know. I am going to find out though. I've got my big pressure chamber all cleaned up and it's ready to go. And I was going to include some of those tests in this video here, but it's just getting too long. I think I'm going to make a separate video for that, and I'll give you guys an update on how this is doing at that time. So, let me know what you guys think. Should I add the slugs? Should I not? Is there anything else I should change? Let me know in the comments down below. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.